And this is really important because people, at least in the past, people looked for best practices. But we can't see best practices, to be honest with you. In our research, particularly in this research we did, we noticed that organizations follow their own path. And the paths lead to a good way, to the way they expect to be. So the elements they choose are unique to the organization. Okay, different elements. But what is common in the 5 paths we identified ourselves is that they do invite employees to participate. This is really critical because without the buy-in of the workforce, you can't implement it. Even if there is a brilliant idea from the top, you need to have the buy-in of the employees. They need to come up with ideas. For instance, in one organization, and this is I know I'm aware of that. This is in the private sector, and I'm saying that. This example from the private sector. When we interviewed this chemical company, we said to them, "How do you do it?" They said, "Yes, we invite them." And then I said, what kind of results do you get? But we get 80 to 100 ideas per year. Why can't we do that in the public sector? Why? What keeps us from doing that?
Yeah. Great, thank you very much. All right, so now we're going to hear from Professor Verhulst, who is the research professor at the Research Group on Politics and Public Governance in the Department of Political Science at the University of Antwerp. And I believe we're going to be hearing about your work on collaborative innovation. So again, another very important facet for us to explore this afternoon. Professor.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Many thanks for inviting me to this occasion. I'm very glad to be here. And I was also pleased by reading the report from ACCA about innovation in public finance, because it stresses so much that radical innovation basically needs public sector to collaborate with other actors. And that's basically what we have been studying in the last years with other universities like Leuven and Louvain-la-Neuve and another Walloon university, but also in a European project called Tropico. And the idea is basically to study how in collaborative arrangements public sector works together with private actors and with citizens to co-create new solutions, new policies, new services, new technologies, or new processes. And what we did, we studied cases in very encompassing cases like circular economy transition arenas versus very small ones, local ones. We studied technological and non-technological innovations made in these areas. And we did it through interviews, social network analysis, so what happens between these persons in such networks, and also by surveys. And I will present you some examples or some conclusions from the research. So basically, it's about co-creation, so collaborative arrangements, small ones, big ones, where public sector works together with other actors. These actors can be private companies, non-profit actors, or citizens. And what basically happens in these collaborative arrangement, in order to come to innovation, are 3 steps. It's also a theory developed by Eva Söderson and Jacob Turfing from Roskilde. So basically, first you need synergy. You need to bring together different resources, different ideas, different opinions, and combine them in a certain way. And that's crucial to come to radical solutions to wicked issues. The second step is that basically there's a process of transformational learning. So people in these areas learn from each other and have a cognitive change about how they think about subjects. They build upon each other's ideas. And they come to generate new ideas and new solutions. And then you need to build commitment and ownership among the participants and their home organizations, because all these participants have their own home organization, being public or private, in order to implement the innovation, to sustain the innovation over time. And in order to have these 3 mechanisms at work, there are a combination of conditions needed at 3 levels. First of all, there's the level of the individual participant in these collaborative arrangements. So think of the public servant or the private actor representative who is sitting in these collaborative arrangements, these fora where they develop new ideas. On the other hand, also some conditions need to be present at the home organization of these individuals. And the last level is some conditions need to be present at the level of the collaborative arrangement, of the partnership, how it is managed. And I will take you through some of them and try to avoid more trivial ones, because of course there has been numerous studies about public sector innovation, so it's more about the specific thing of doing this in a co-creation environment. So first of all, at the level of the individual participant in these collaborative arrangements, the importance of creativity seems to be very important. So more creative civil servants of private actor individuals lead to better solutions with more learning. They need to have a high public service motivation. So it does not mean that they have to work at public service, but even the citizens have to be motivated to contribute to policies. So they need often to go beyond their immediate own interest. And that's also the individuals that you would find most. They need to have a high level of trust propensity. So in terms of interpersonal skills, they need to have a high level of trust towards each other. And the diversity in background is very important, as I already mentioned. And it means in terms of they need to be diverse in terms of their own assets, their own knowledge, their opinions, but they should not be too diverse so that they can't understand each other. So there is some kind of smart combination needed, and you need to, as a manager of such collaborative arrangements, need to take the time that they know each other and come to a common language. Important is also when it comes to learning at the individual level, basically when it comes to creating solutions and new innovations in such arrangements, they learn at 3 levels. They learn about the content of the issue, so ideas which pop up, but they also learn about the relations between actors and who has which resources, who brings in which resources, but also the political dimension, who has which power and who is backed up by which important actor to get things done. So these are elements. This points mainly at the fact that when government wants to stimulate these things, they need to stimulate creativity, they need to stimulate interpersonal skills, and they need to stimulate motivation of actors to be involved in such arrangements. When we come to the variables at the level of the home organization, of course, these individuals who sit at these collaborative arrangements often get some kind of assignment or mandate from their own home organization, be there to protect our turf and make sure that they don't come up with something which renders us unnecessary over time. So the home organization is very important, and also the way they constrain or stimulate these individual participants. And there we came to the following conclusions. Some are more trivial than others, but the leadership style of their managers is of course very important and should be supportive in terms of lending real hands-on support towards their activities in these arrangements. Or they may pressurize innovation, so giving a high priority to this innovation and hoping it will succeed, what happens there in the arrangement. So priority by the managers, priority by the ministers is important, but you should also give freedom to act to these individuals. So they should be able to have a room of autonomy to take their own decisions when they are in these collaborative arrangements, because they need to think out of the box, think creative, and should be able to commit to the organization at a certain time. When it came to organizational culture, a striking finding was that, of course, administrative cultures, more hierarchical cultures, are from the home organization are not good in the stage of generating ideas, because people don't think freely, they are highly controlled by their own organization. but sometimes it has an advantage when it comes to commit organizations to implement innovations. Because this hierarchical or administrative culture might, once they commit the organization to do something, they might have the right procedures and the right power structures to actually implement it. So that's also an important issue. We also studied the element of red tape, so on the rules which are cumbersome in the home organization and how it affects how people interact in these co-creation arenas. And there are some important elements which came out. I just picked some. There should be enough flexibility to reshuffle resources en cours de route. There should be also the possibility to establish non-regulated zones, free zones to experiment, or less regulated zones. And also the issue which came up a lot is that red tape in terms of who you collaborate with and how you collaborate has a very important role. So tendering rules, also developed by the European Commission and others, often have a very restrictive impact upon these collaborative arrangements, because once they have a good idea, they have to break up the collaborative arrangement and look for the right partner, and often it's not a partner who was in the network before, so you get all kinds of strategic thinking. So that's something we need to think about. To sum up, at the organizational level, you also have learning capacity, of course. You need a capacity to routinize innovation in your regular work. But connective capacity is very important. So the capacity of an organization to build networks, to stimulate their individuals to build networks is very important. And then I come to the last level, which is the level of conditions at how the partnership works, or this arrangement work, this group of people co-creating things. First of all, the element of diversity, I already mentioned it, but it means that it's very important when you think of such co-creation elements that you think, who do I need here? And who do I need is in terms of diversity of resources, but also include end users in the arrangements, include the powerful actors, those who can pose their veto to certain innovations, or which can actually put something in a legal mandate. So often you need public sector actors. And you need smart structures to structure this, this kind of interactions. Also about the way these partnerships are actually managed. There's several things which come up, but I will leave it to this for the moment.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Verhulst. I was listening through your contributions there, and I think from my perspective, it'd be helpful to hear just more on how collaborative innovation arrangements and the processes that you're discussing should be managed. It neatly follows. Very good.
It neatly follows up. In a way, something which we actually need what we need to strengthen in the public sector is this capacity to govern such or to manage such collaborative arrangements. And there are several strategies. There's also a lot of literature about this, network management strategies it's called. You have, for example, the idea of introducing process rules. So it means that when actors step in such collaborative arrangements, they need, certainly at a certain moment in time, to actually engage clear rules about how decisions will be made, for example. And that should be smart. If you have clear small networks, then you can use consensus, but often you have to move to majority or other ways of decision making when it gets more structured. There's the connecting element, which basically means that you need to build common ground and common language among the parties, give them some kind of common base of knowledge so to which they can build upon for developing further ideas. And this element of exploring. So basically when you manage such network, you need to have a set of strategies to make people think out of the box when they are there, and to forget their organizational interest when they are at least at the collaborative arrangement developing ideas. And one last important thing is that basically when you are managing such collaborative arrangement as a coordinator, which is often the public sector, you have to have a smart combination between process management and project management. Because once you move, process management is very important in the start. You have to build relations, you have to urge people to think out of the box, you have to bring in new ideas, connect with new actors. But once you come to the more exploitation phase, so like building the innovation, making sure it's financed, making sure it's implemented, then you need to switch at a certain moment in time to project management. And the last thing is also, when you are managing such networks, it doesn't mean that you have to do everything in consensus. And there's also a dark side to network management. So it's also a bit strategic actioning, and that's in terms of who do you involve at which stage to get further, when do you call in higher powers to pressurize something, so that also plays a role. But that's something we actually miss in a lot of public sector organizations, is this kind of capacity and training to work in such collaborative arrangement and to build them and to manage them.
Great, thank you very much. So now I'd like to open up to everyone participating today. And I believe we have facilities to turn on mics, don't we? By the look of the infrastructure in the room, that's correct? Okay, very good. So what I'll do is I'll pose a couple of questions, and then feel free to raise your hand if you have additional questions for the panel after we've posed those. Though we do have all of about 7 minutes. I see Cecile looking at me eagerly. Okay. So I'll maybe pose one question then. So I think a key issue in all of this, in terms of cultivating public sector innovation, is the allocation of what is almost always scarce resources in a public sector context. So in your experiences, and I'm happy for you to jump in at your own time, how do you see that case best made for allocating resources to innovative initiatives within a public sector context? And maybe I will start with maybe a natural position with Shiva on my left.
Yes, I mean, again, given that I use two frameworks, one the internal EIB and perspective, and one with the second, I think I would have a natural tendency to think of how we advise our clients. I mean, so these are public, among them, therefore, also public sector, innovation agencies very often. So they have a scarce budget. To fund research and innovation, and what we are trying to explain is that yes, maybe historically and conventionally, grants are basically the way to fund innovation or research and innovation, but that maybe it does require, therefore, sort of using your scarce resources smartly by allocating, therefore, your grants where indeed it is, let's say, fundamental research, things that are having really no commercial prospect, visibility, so to speak, are very upstream, and reserving part of your budget for these blended finance things where you can actually then attract maybe other philanthropic foundations, you can attract EU budgets and others and blend it, so to speak, and go towards the sort of projects that actually have greater visibility of cash flows and hence a potential for repayability. And I think this is basically that mindset. Many times it's actually a paradigm shift, it's a mindset change, and it is a tough decision because, that means that some beneficiaries that have been maybe addicted to grants may now have to live with actually having funding that they have to basically pay back.
Okay, so a change in mindset, a change in approach to risk, I imagine, as well, is another really important area. Good. Do we have any other initial views on this particular question?
What we have seen is that some organizations are using procurement in a smart way, so that there are certain ways that procurement is organized in order to implement the various projects. but some departments decided to see whether, the procurement departments can see how they can cooperate with other actors within the borders of legality, of course, and do things in a clever way. But of course, the ideal case is when there are funds that are allocated to the project. In other occasions, we have seen innovators using the budgets of different departments. Rather than having one single fund, they were using different budgets because that was to the benefit of the whole organization, not just to one department.
Which I think is really helpful, because so often in innovation, the outcomes will occur across the organization. It's not going to be within a silo. So thinking about it where you're allocating budgets that way is a very helpful lens as well. Excellent. Pirek, do you have any views here?
I think it's about telling good stories. I really like the story with the bridge. So if I have to go in front of politicians or in front of the management of the OECD or public sector organizations where we're doing transformation projects, then it's about finding the story that works. And in reality, in terms of even in cases with scarce resources in public sector, the motivational factors are a sense of urgency and crisis. So if you have a refugee crisis, Canada, Germany, huge amount of innovation happening in that way. Another interesting thing that actually Koen mentioned was the sense of organizations coming into behind the collaborative forums as thinking like, we need to be relevant. I need to hold my own organizational position in these relationships. And another kind of a motivational factor in these conditions is to really concentrate on the fact of what is your relevance. So I'm sorry to say, but the world is going to change regardless if you want it or not. And innovation is going to come inside the public sector or outside the public sector. So it's going to happen to you, or you're going to be part of shaping it. So for public sector, kind of in these silo organizations, actually relevance and being relevant to those conditions is a huge motivating factor. Why a lot of investments in technologies are made currently, and why also in the conditions of austerity, a lot of investments get made as well.
Very good. So the message that the status quo is not the option anymore, because the change is coming in any case. Would you like to close this off, Professor, or are you comfortable with? You're very comfortable. Okay, we can speak about it over the coffee break instead. So we are actually just running out of time now, and we do have a coffee, but I'll hand over to Lazaros to close off today's panel discussion.
Indeed, it's break time, so coffee is offered outside. We return at 16:10 to have a second panel discussion moderated by Brian McHenry. welcome back, colleagues. And without further ado, I hand over to Brian for the second panel of our conference. Brian.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Lazaros, and again for hosting this event here at the European Court of Auditors. My name is Brian McHenry, and I'm a partner with BDO in Ireland, and I head up the advisory area of our firm, but I particularly focus on the area of healthcare. I'm a member of ACCA, as I know a number of you are here this afternoon, and I had the pleasure a few years ago of being the global president of ACCA. So I'm delighted to moderate the second panel of this conference, and I have before you some very, very distinguished panelists, and I'm really looking forward. I know exactly the areas that we're going to cover and the questions that certainly I'm going to be asking. So I think a very informative session that we're going to have here this afternoon. It is, of course, around the area of innovation in the public sector, and of course that is ultimately about delivering for the citizens in an effective and in an efficient way. And when I think about it in maybe one of the areas that I advise in healthcare, we know right across the European Union and indeed beyond, the delivery of healthcare to an ageing population is becoming one of the greatest challenges to governments, to the exchequers of most of the European nations. And national and governments and the public sector need to encourage and be the catalyst. And I think it is about being the catalyst for innovation in healthcare delivery. And so, for instance, in one particular area where I think there's going to be a much greater need to deliver as solutions, and it is, of course, in the whole area of home care solutions, because, of course, if you effectively deliver in the home environment, well then you're not incurring the expense of long-term care, hospitalised care. And so technology and innovation is just hugely important in that area. It's important for governments to put the infrastructure in place that allows for instance, censoring technology, telehealth, and others such as, sophisticated medical recording of electronic patient records and other things. And that's important that the catalysts are coming for government to encourage technologies to be deployed in an area like healthcare. And so I really do believe that innovation can be so important to delivering good outcomes, because, as we know, if you are talking about healthcare, it's very much the desire of our older citizens to be able to live in their homes rather than in long-term care settings. And of course, it's a very important thing for governments to be able to balance their healthcare budgets, that there's a move in that type of direction as well. So I think, just in terms of my area, I see the need for really significant innovation in the area of one of the biggest sectors of government spending in any economy, which is in healthcare. And so it is really incumbent upon our ministries of health and our governments generally, and for them to embrace and indeed to provide the infrastructure for technology, for innovation to be used in the public sector. So maybe they're just some of my thoughts, but enough for me, because I have a panel of real experts here. And so to get our panel discussion started, I'm going to invite our first speaker, who is here on my left, Emanuele Baldisi, who is European Commission Director for Digital Services at DG Informatics, or Digit as we call it. I saw the the Commission just published a report outlining that the ISA 2 programme, which is the interoperability solutions for public administrations, businesses and citizens, is well on track. And so congratulations to you and your team in this regard. Emanuele will be speaking about promoting innovation in government, and in particular regarding the digital transformation at work in the European Commission. So, can I hand it over to you in the first instance?
Thank you, Brian, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here. I'm based here in Luxembourg with part of my team, and we are particularly good friends with the colleagues in the European Court of Auditors, with whom we have a very good cooperation and co-creation, just to reuse one of the terminology of the previous panel. There was a reference to technology in the previous sessions a lot, so let's tackle technology. And I work in a technology department, and my job is to try to enable the transformation and innovation in business through technology. So I will be talking about our digital transformation strategy for the European Commission, which is, however, not an IT strategy. I'm not here to sell you what kind of new technologies can do, let's say, wonders for you, because the whole spirit of the Commission recently adopted strategy is that technology is just an enabler. Now, just is a big word, obviously, but it's an enabler. So we need to start from the business perspective, and we need to see what value we would like to create, and then technology comes next as a facilitator or as a supporting element, if you want. That's very important, and you'll see that it comes back in the few points that I would like to stress. So what does it mean that you put the business first? Using a simple, let's say, picture, if you want, it's not like putting the old wine in the new bottle and trying to sell the wine as new, because you would need also to change the wine and not just the bottle. What does it mean? It means that by purely putting new technologies on top of existing business processes, you are not really facilitating life of the end users a lot. You're not creating really value. You may get a bit of efficiency, perhaps, because instead of using pencil and paper, we are using computers to do things. But the fundamental principle of our business processes, our services being designed in the analogic era, will not be touched unless you use the opportunity of the technology revolution and what the technology enablers allow you to fundamentally rethink the way the services are provided. And you were making a reference, Brian, to the ISA program, which is a program that supports interoperability. What is interoperability in practice? It's about connecting the dots. As a user, probably interfacing public government platforms, you have met several times the word single window. And even in the Commission, we have several single windows. But what a user would like to have when it's trying to get access to service is not many single windows where you have to repeat the same information over and over. It's a real single window, which is a seamless way to interact with government, request information, not be asked twice the same information that has been already sent to another government agency, and pretend that the government does the job behind, let's say, the screen, and connect the dots. And interoperability, it's one technical, let's say, enabler of this very simple concept that is called the once-only principle. Very simple, but very powerful. And changing the way the services are designed, not anymore in stovepipes and silos, department by department, domain by domain, and connecting the dots, or allowing the technology to connect the dots and the information behind the scene, it's a game changer for citizens. As I said before, you don't have to repeat the same information twice to the government as a whole, and you're not asked to, let's say, do or apply for procedures in different websites, for example, when these procedures are all connected. In other words, looking at the users as the center of the strategy, it's a key component of the business-driven element in a digital transformation for the organization. So this means also being humble and not pretend that either in the, let's say, IT department of the European Commission or any other organization, or in the domain-specific policy department, let's take it, the health policy department, we know it everything. There's a lot of questions that you will need to ask the users, the end users of the services, and you will need to build users' journeys that make sense for the users. And not necessarily this squares with the view of the service producer, because the service producer is probably aims at, let's say, doing more with less. So efficiency is a key driver of typical adaptive innovation. But if you really want to be radical in the sense of the report, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the end user and perhaps rethink the way you do things. Data-driven, it's another key term that we have put as the principle in our digital transformation strategy for the Commission, and it means in a very simple way that data are very important assets for any organization, including in the public sector, because we consume data every day. We collect data, we report on the basis of data, and we take decisions on the basis of data. Unfortunately, we do that in a very unstructured way, and we still have in many public organizations, including the Commissions, a very fragmented data ecosystem. The data are siloed into boxes, and it's very difficult to make them speak to each other. And sometimes some countries like Finland are more advanced than others in having this type of services, but more often than not, one would have to look for the information in different parts. So you would not have a simple capability like the Google search that we all use to retrieve information on the basis of a pure semantic, so a pure natural language term, and be prompted in a nice to integrate way all the data. So being data-driven means that the information should be at the service of the processes, and for an organization like the Commission, also, which is a policy-making organization, also being at the service of the policy cycle. So understanding what is on the ground, doing the ex-ante evaluation of any action that would hopefully improve the policy objectives, and then measuring in itinere, so during the implementation of the policies, and then ex post what are the impacts and the outcomes of the policies. And data are there to do that. So this is the other key corner of the digital transformation, very ambitious digital transformation that we are setting in place. Now, the how is as important as the what, obviously. It's good to be ambitious, but you need to put in place also a system that really works. And here I will really repeat a message that came from the previous panel. Our strategy is based on the co-everything approach. It means that it cannot be done in isolation by the technology department. It cannot be done in isolation by the business. And I'm saying this because I'm working in an IT department. The traditional analogic way of discussing technology matters is that someone comes to your office and says, I want a Ferrari in a red color and with 7 seats. And then you start trying to bargaining that you cannot do that. And this supplier-provider relation is the traditional way of doing IT. But in a co-creation mood, you sit together and you see what are your needs, first of all. Whether you need a Ferrari or not should come as a second dimension. So the co-delivery, the co-develop, and also co-finance and co-govern or co-manage are very important elements. And here, being the European Commission a decentralized organization where we have several centers of authority and responsible DGs for different domains, we spent a lot of time to get the right governance, both for the IT, so we have now a full-fledged board that and policies that govern the allocations of priorities and investments, and also for the data, because data are so important that they require a function that is governing and managing the data assets as if they were any other assets, physical assets and financial assets in an organization. So this is very important, but the innovation part also comes from a change in the approach. We, in trying to use technologies that are emerging in some cases, like, for example, artificial intelligence applied to specific government problems, we need to learn a lot before we can go out and buy or build something. And how do we learn if we don't experiment? And by experimenting, it means that we accept to fail. Now, this is an easier thing to say in a conference than to do in practice, because it means a complete 360 degrees change in the way the organization works. And then the duty of the managers that are pushing the innovation innovation in practice is to make it work within an organization that has also its own administrative rules, its own hierarchies, and so on and so forth. So I'm very pleased that this issue came up also in the previous discussion, because the way we are doing this in the Commission is not to opt for one model versus another, but try to blend various models, have different types of ways of working depending on the type of questions that you have. So we have our innovation lab type of activities. I know that the European Court of Auditors also has a similar lab, which is a very good development, and this is where we are trying things, and we accept that we can fail because this is learning by doing. And then we develop what we call proof of concept, so small-scale experiments that can, or prototypes that in some cases are successful, and then we move the prototypes to the factory, and this is where the whole machinery or the force of the machinery takes place. And if you have a pipeline where you are seamlessly moving from the lab to the factory and you don't get stuck in the middle, then this is going to be accelerating the modernization exercise. Now, final word from my side on the how we are doing this. To implement such an ambitious plan with key headline targets and also the principles that I share with you, we needed to have a process in place. And the process that we agreed to have within the Commission was to work around two concepts. One is a concept of business-led modernization plan. So we go and talk to the different domains in the Commission, the different policy area, and we start identifying what are the challenges that they have in their policy environment. What is it that it's their pain point? What is it that keeps them awake at night? And then we work all the way down to what we call in the technology domain capabilities, which are the building blocks of a technology platform that will make their nights a bit less sleepless, hopefully, and try to solve some of the business problems. And this is all iterative and quite time-consuming, because we do this with public design methodologies, having workshops with the various components of these departments, and we're launching this across the board. So, in a nutshell, this is a complex exercise. I think that technology can help, but you shouldn't be starting with technology. I'm saying this working for a technology department.
Well, now there's an insight into a very, very large and complex, but so important exercise, because, as I think you've very well demonstrated, it is an asset. The data is an asset because it informs, but it also drives. It can really, really be the basis of driving good policy as a consequence of strong information. Before I pass on, I would like to just ask you one question, which we heard the priorities of the van der Leyen Commission. But I'd like, and I'd be interested to get your views on what impact you think the new College of Commissioners, the new Commission, will have on the digital strategy and its implementation.
Okay, thanks. Obviously, there is some uncertainty in the picture. We are in between an outgoing and an incoming commission. But I think that the President-elect made it clear in her headline political priorities that digital transformation is a key policy priority area for Europe. And she mentioned a very important concept, that we as an organization should walk the talk and lead by example, which I think are two powerful statements. In other words, we cannot go to public administrations all over Europe and ask to implement open data policies, for example, unless the Commission is doing this and it's also, let's say, more advanced. And the same goes for various other services that you can imagine. So, let's say, at this stage, I think that the message is very clear. The transformation of the Commission as an organization that should be top in terms of the application of innovation is a big priority. A small example is that she announced that as of the 1st of November, when the new college will be established, all the meetings will be completely paperless, what is called the e-college type of meeting. This has been done already in some government administrations. The first one was the government of Estonia. Yeah. So the Commission will try to follow in the steps of these advanced countries.
In actual fact, I think the very first, our last visit here, ACCA's last visit here, where we were hosted, I think about 2 years ago, Lazaros, we had a presentation actually from the Estonian government around their use of technology and innovation in government. So it's interesting that you allude to that. Clearly, your passion in and around it being customer focused and serving the needs is very, very clear. The audience will get a chance in a while maybe to ask you some further questions. But now I want to turn to another distinguished member of this House, Eva Lindström, who is a member of the European Court of Auditors Chamber 5, reporting member of the European Court of Auditors Review on Sustainability Reporting, and chair of the Court of Auditors Digital Steering Committee. Eva, I've read with interest your report on reporting on sustainability, a stocktake of EU institutions and agencies, and I'm sure we're all eager to hear a little bit more about that this afternoon. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brian, and I would also like to thank ACCA for a very most interesting report. I think it's really creates food for thought. Just let me start by saying that I think we have two major forces that is really driving development in our society right now. The first is digitalization, and the second is the growing demand for sustainable development and sustainable solutions. And I think both these two forces are really important to bring us forward. They are also both disruptive. They cause change. They are connected with big challenges. There will be a demand for new business model, not only in the private sector, but of course they are also very strong drivers for innovation. And actually I think they're also very closely interconnected. It was very interesting to hear to Mr. Baldacci's your presentation, and I fully agree with you when you say you shouldn't start with technology. You should of course start with what you want to achieve. So in my short presentation or introduction here, I would like to start to talk about focus on sustainable development in the EU, but also on the role that we as auditors can play. And I think the time to talk about sustainable development is totally right. We know that sustainability has been on the top agenda of very many voters in connection to the European Parliament election. We also have this very week, this Climate Action Summit in the United Nations, and I also think that many of you have seen on all these demonstrations. I think it was over 4 million young people demonstrated on last Friday on their demand for a secure future. So this is a very timely subject. I think it's also interesting to discuss the role of auditors, because I think there, on a general basis, there is a demand for non-financial information. In the private sector, very much driven by investors. Most of them have realized that sustainability risks are also financial risks, so they want to know how do you handle sustainability risks. And it's not just about climate, it could be about gender, it could be about the conditions where the raw materials is produced, it could be about income distribution, and of course it could be about innovation and economic sustainability. And I think what we see today is a growing market for sustainability reporting, but the question is, can we trust this information, or is it just sort of very nice PR products, or what we can call for greenwashing? So I think to give some kind of assurance, a negative assurance or a positive assurance to that the stakeholders can trust this information is an extremely important role for auditors. Now, so we had presented a report where we looked at how is EU handling the question of reporting on sustainability and how can one trust this information. And the starting point was really twofold. The first, of course, the Agenda 2030, where the EU and its member states are very clearly committed to these 17 sustainable development goals. In fact, EU has been a very strong driving actor in this process. And the second is the EU directive. I think very many of you are aware that last year, for the first time, so-called public interest entities in certain areas had to produce sustainability reports. And today, 7,400 companies do this kind of reporting. And I can say also that this directive has been implemented in different ways in different countries. You're not sort of forced to report on the sustainability in relation to the SDGs, but you should at least mention the environmental, the economic, and the social consequences of your business, and also how you have handled